Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is Tuesday, January 28th, and today I'm doing a video catching up on some of the current transits, including Venus and Mars as square to one another, both engaged with Neptune, Mars square Neptune, Venus conjoined with Neptune, and a little bit more on the some recent current events and how they sync up with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we recently had. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit today also about the topic of karma, and a topic that I like to talk about. If you've watched some of my previous episodes, I've done some series on karma and if we can change our karma or not. We're going to talk about that a little bit about that again today, um, especially with some of the recent aspects and things happening in the collective, and share a few personal stories along the way. So let's take a look at the chart and give you a sense of where everything is at right now, highlight the transits we're going to look at. So here is the current astro clock ticking, and let's go ahead and give you a drawing here. So here's Mars in Sagittarius, and here's Venus and Neptune in the sign of Pisces. And we have a just passing out of a Venus-Mars square, and of course Mars just passing through the square to Neptune. Now I wrote about this, or I spoke about this, should say, at the beginning of the month in my monthly overview video. But uh, recently I've spent more time on the Jupiter Mars Antisha, which has been, really interesting to me personally. I've been following that, and some of you have heard me talk about that with Kobe Bryant's recent passing and stuff like that. Um, so I haven't been focused as much on the Venus Mars square, and I thought today would be a nice time to catch up with that, especially with Neptune in the mix and lots of questions I'm getting about things happening in the news and so forth. So that's what it looks like. It's passing right now, but within a 3-degree range of either applying or passing is when you typically have the effects. So maybe, another 4 days of feeling the effects of this transit. Um, Now, first of all, people have been asking me about the coronavirus and what I think about that. And my answer is that's Saturn-Pluto right there. Saturn-Pluto, in fact, historically has been linked with um, some plagues and some uh, natural disasters. And oftentimes, what we see in the collective, a way of describing Saturn-Pluto is the upsurge of some kind of darkness, sickness, human frailty, human corruption, and it comes into the pours into the collective, and we see it in massive events like the corruption in the U.S. government, the impeachment trial, the bushfires in Australia, the being on the brink of war, the coronavirus, that so many other things as well. But they have a way of stepping up and becoming very vivid and sort of profound. And there is this feeling that often accompanies it with Saturn in the midst, which is that we're in need of some kind of moral, spiritual, or structural reform. Um, it's actually quite profound the way that these events can serve as a kind of wake-up call. Not always right away, especially with Saturn. It takes a while. It's like realizing that you need a. It's like realizing that your driveway needs to be concrete poured, redone because it's cracking up or it's falling apart. It's the way that you might realize that will happen one day very suddenly. Your driveway is falling apart and there's cracks in the cement and whatever, and as a result you kick some stone free and you twist your ankle, and suddenly something that you've been looking at every day for a year in your driveway, and you suddenly go, okay, so that's it. That's the last straw, right? And we don't think about that as a magical moment. We don't think about that as a psychically relevant moment. We oftentimes skip right past that moment. We just think, well, I stubbed my toe and then finally I thought I got to do something about this thing. And that's kind of the human level of it. But from a spiritual standpoint, this is part of how karma works. Karma is not we're dealing, if it helps to adjust our view of how karmic results and feedback is coming to us, if we think about everything that we're doing being listened to and responded to by a divine person, like a being. And if you think about the universe, people say the universe said this, or the universe was saying that to me. And really, the universe, in many ways, has just replaced our word for God, because for many people, the word God is very painful or implies a very limited idea in comparison to what feels like a vaster territory that they experience of God within. And so the universe becomes this way of talking about that. But either way you put it, the idea is that there's a being, there's a real person. And the word in Sanskrit we think of sometimes as Purusha, which sort of means person. And so at any rate, our activities all the time, whatever we do in this world, we treat it like it's a dead mechanism, like it's just a cause and effect machine that we're just putting quarters into all the time by means of our actions. And we think, I pretty much know that if I do this, then I'll get this outcome. But actually, every time that we make or take an action, there's nowhere that that action is going but out into a web of eternal living relationships. And so, as we all know, when you make a choice and it has an impact upon somebody else, that's alive. And so the response that comes back from a living being to a living being, if you want to think of the universe as a living being, others, the environment around you, God, the response that we get is personal. It's idiosyncratic. Even though the world appears to move and operate by laws that are very causal, and in some sense it does work that way. It is there are laws of the universe, there are laws of karma and so forth, but they're very, very personal. And a lot of the times what we get is we get a little warning. We get a little, you know, just let me nudge you in this direction. That inner prompting comes up. And Bhakti Yoga, we say maybe the super soul, the God within your heart, Paramatma, is speaking to you somehow and giving you just a little nudge to go in a slightly different direction. But it takes time, right? There will be some moment that will come up like that, boom, where you stub your toe and you're like, this is only going to get worse unless I do something about it. And somehow that thing pushes you over the edge. Well, essentially, doing charts for a long time and studying something about karma from the Bhakti Yoga standpoint, it's my belief that when those things happen, that what they're really giving us is a wake-up call. The karma of the season has a requirement. It's built into it. There may be some degree to which we don't have full control over what's going to happen because of previous karma. But we do get inner promptings, we do get inner guidance, and there is a way in which the karmic law, the letter of the law, can be required, its requirements can be satisfied. The letter of the law's requirements can be satisfied, but with a slightly different version. There's multiplicities, or there's multiple potentialities within how the letter of the law is getting satisfied at any given time, and that does depend on our choice. And not just our choices, as in let me manipulate to get a better outcome, but in the sensitivity of our choices, that we're making the choices because we're receiving and recognizing that God presence in our heart or in the world around us. And so if we're making our choices based on the feeling of submitting ourselves to that guidance of how to just shift a little bit. It's my feeling, although it's not able to be proven, because how could you can't really compare with what would have happened otherwise at any point in life. But it's my feeling that there are ways in which the letter of the karmic law gets satisfied without the worst thing having to happen. Let me give you a case in point. And I'm saying all of this, by the way, as a way of trying to come back around to talking about Saturn and Pluto. So we will come back around to that, but this is why I said I wanted to talk about karma today. There's actually, before I go into this personal story, let's talk about in the news and the current events for a little bit. Saturn and Pluto right now, just conjoining, have been in that process of conjoining for a while. And one of the things that we've seen in one place in the world that has been impacted by this has been Hong Kong. Of course, the protests in Hong Kong, if you've been following that at all, have been really intense. My best friend lives basically in Hong Kong. I have a couple best friends, but one of my best friends lives in Hong Kong, and he has been firsthand witness to the protests and the the tactics that the government has used to silence them. And so there's the stubbing your toe, right? On a collective level, it's like there's these toe stubs, and then we see, coming from the same place in the world, on the collective stage, we see this virus breaking out, right? What do viruses do, right? I mean, what are they accomplishing? Well, a lot of the times they're accomplishing the exact same thing that that stubbing your toe on the concrete of the parking lot that needs remaking is doing. Even though it may not seem like it, or it's not always rationally discernible. Every time, I can only speak for myself, right? And what I've noticed in people's lives doing astrology for a long time, which is that when a virus comes along, it has a way of alerting or awakening you to something and saying, okay, look, this habit, this behavior put you at risk. It lowered your immunity. It in some ways, because we weren't listening, or because we were moving through a patch of unconsciousness around something came in. There was some pathway for something to come in, and because it did, it had this effect of being very cleansing and very healing, even as it took me down. I hear people in my practice talk about viruses, sicknesses, difficult karmic events like that all the time. And so sometimes what Saturn-Pluto is doing is it pops up with these big things in the news, and it has this effect of showing you where the structure, where the system is crumbling, collapsing, where there are weak points, and basically that part of it is sudden, but then there's a slow sort of moral, spiritual recalibration of trying to turn the ship in another direction, or course correct, that has to be done. And that part takes a while. It's not like it happens overnight. Just like an alcoholic may have a wake-up call that starts them on the path of recovery, but recovery is a long, slow process. That's Saturn-Pluto, as I've understood it in working with the archetypal combination over the years. So we have that in the collective right now. So you can I personally think of the coronavirus, if I'm going to think about it at all in relation to astrology, I'm thinking about it in terms of the Saturn-Pluto dynamic, where there are different images in the collective that act as that toe stub, especially in a cardinal sign like Capricorn. And then we have to respond. And there's the opportunity to respond, sometimes slowly, sometimes at the last minute, sometimes right at the time when it feels like, you hit the brakes right before you crash your car, so to speak. But there is some sense of being able to pull out of what otherwise could be a devastating consequence. And that there's that moral imperative and that sense of careful judgment, and the ability for some kind of thoughtful but challenging reform. And so I see that as a big part of the coronavirus, not just because it's a virus and so viruses should make us wake up, but because the fear of death and the realization that we can be wiped out very easily, the repeated instances of something fracturing in Hong Kong, those kinds of things, they have this way deep in the psyche, deep inside, of starting to alert us to something. And just like that, just like we do it all the time, I go back one last time, just saying, it happens. At some point you go, you know what? I stubbed my toe on that thing I should have been fixing. I should have fixed like 8 months ago or something. So now I better do it. Why do we do that, right? The only explanation I can come up with is that it's because we're not just living in a dead universe where material laws, outcomes, choices are, prescribed over and over in the same way. It's a personal reality that we live in. And while there are moving laws of karma, if we listen to our inner promptings, there is an opportunity to move with the seasons of life, uh, fulfilling something that the time requires. The times always require something of us, but having our duty to the moment, in a more conscious manner, means that we experience the karma more personally, and where there's more personal connection and intimacy and love, the experiences are more sacred, whatever they might be. If we can't see Saturn-Pluto as speaking to us in that way right now, I don't think we're doing well, So I think that's how we have to see these things. Now, I want to tell you a personal story of the same basic idea. And this kind of involves something that's happening in the collective right now, as well. That's not necessarily just tied to Saturn-Pluto, but is also tied to the Mars-Venus square and Neptune in the mix. I want to talk about Mars-Neptune for a moment and the death of the superstar Kobe Bryant. This impacted me in a personal way that I really couldn't have anticipated. And I say that as someone who almost never reacts or responds over many years to, when one celebrity dies or the next celebrity dies. It happens, right? Seems like every couple of years, a big celebrity dies too young. He was maybe an exception along the lines of like Elvis, or, so he was a megastar all over the world. And he died in a very tragic way, like in a helicopter accident. But it hit me so personally, and I had to take time to really reflect, upon why this was impacting me so much. And I thought, well, on the first stage, I just thought, well, probably because, I'm something of a sports fan, and a lot of people are probably feeling the same way, and I just kind of wrote it off like that. But then some details caught my eye, and reflection upon my own birth chart caught my eye. So let's talk about some of the details of Mars and Neptune, first of all. So here's an athlete who perishes in a tragic way, Mars-Neptune. But Mars-Jupiter Antisha, if you listen to my last couple of videos, fits the description of his passing very well. It's actually a combination of things always, but not only was it a athlete that perished in a tragic way and is now memorialized forever. That's Mars-Neptune. Neptune is the memorialization. Neptune is the word forever. And Mars is the athlete. Mars is the warrior. It's the immortality of the warrior. It's the appeal of that image. It's the loss of that image. It's the grieving and the tears collectively around the death of the hero. That's Mars-Neptune. Mars-Neptune also literally was involved because Neptune rules fog, and the reason that his helicopter crashed was apparently because of terrible fog in the area. So there's multiple levels at which the symbolism is always at work. I find it interesting that there are so many different reactions and responses, if you've watched the media at all around this, which I spent some time watching some clips on YouTube and stuff like that. And I noticed some things that were interesting, which are indications of people grappling with the karma and with the nature of karma, with the nature of God, with the nature of reality, with the nature of mortality, and archetypes. And you hear people talking about them. It's really refreshing. And it did something very personal for me that I'll tell you in sort of second part of my little talk here on this. So the thing that I heard the sports commentators saying on the one hand was that when it's your time, it's your time. When the man upstairs calls you home, it's your time, right? And there was almost a Christ-like sense of nobility attached to this. It's a higher meaning. There's a higher purpose. It was time to be taken home to God. And so there's that same echo of the immortalization of the hero being taken home to God, Mars-Neptune. On the other hand, you had people saying This is a senseless tragedy. It makes no sense. Things don't work this way. He'd taken a helicopter a million times. And then I heard people even go so far as to say, there's no need to give any kind of explanation for this. No, nothing about karma or God or anything. It's just senseless, meaningless tragedy. And we should just accept it. There's also Mars-Neptune. So even in the range of ways in which people were trying to capture something of the essence of what this means, they were bouncing around in the archetypal landscape of Mars-Neptune. Mars-Neptune is a combination that frustrates the will, that where the will says purpose, and I'm going to go and do something, and it's heroic, and there's victory. When it hits Neptune, it's as though your purpose, your sense of action is dissolved, is frustrated. There was no reason for this. This is purposeless, meaningless, the sense of being defeated or needing to let defeat in because it has a place, it has a reality. On the other hand, you had people, again, the starry Stairway to Heaven motif. This was his time. He was being called home. But what I found refreshing was not so much, well, which explanation do I prefer? But what I found refreshing was that many of the commentators, especially the sports commentators, who are so frequently in a very particular mode of personality, analyzing, dissecting sports, judging people's accomplishments, comparing them, in very passionate, competitive sports mode, that they were in their discussion of why such things happen, which many of them touched on, they became human. You could see that they were on stage raw without a familiar character role to call upon. And in that moment, something very real came through. Something broke through the facade of the professional sports mode of communicating in the media. And I found it very healing and refreshing. Now, the other thing that you saw was widely, people were saying, and I'm surveying probably like 9, 10 different networks that I watched clips on from YouTube. And many of the different networks were saying, for Kobe Bryant, and I quote this, the sky was the limit. In his second act in life after his basketball career, he was going to do even greater things than he did in the first half of life. Mamba mentality, that was his nickname, the Mamba, Black Mamba. Mamba mentality, and what did it mean? And everyone's talking about Mamba mentality and what it meant. And he said over and over again, it meant, achieving, putting in the work, sky is the limit. You can do anything if you work your butt off and care and become single-pointed in your focus, absorbed. And people were very deeply admiring and celebrating this about his life and memorializing it as he had passed, saying he's going to do even greater things and the sky is the limit. So two things. One, on an archetypal level, this is also Mars-Neptune. The fantasy in our culture, whether it's good or not good, I'm not judging, but the fantasy in our culture that's quite popular is the idea that you can do anything. The sky is really the limit. Put yourself to work very, very hard, and you can do anything that you want. No limitations. And we have examples, iconic examples of people like this that are essentially worshipped as a kind of religious and cultural form of worship. And insofar as we fully absorb ourselves into the worship of those symbols, myths, and images, we are practicing a kind of yoga. Because yoga means union. And one of the points of yoga, mystical yoga, is to absorb ourselves fully into the object of worship or meditation. And in our culture, one of the ways that we sell that religious path, that we all have almost a religious level of fervor for the single-pointed focus and absorption into something is usually in terms of making yourself someone that is great, famous, accomplished, masterful, skillful, achieving your goals, hitting the mark. This is a Mars-Neptune fantasy. Certainly, the the value of being fully absorbed with single-pointed attention and devotion to something, it conjures our admiration because it's a glimpse of what yoga is. And yoga means union. And ultimately, we sense that there is something godlike, powerful, beautiful, true about that kind of single pointed absorption and focus. So we worship it. On the other hand, the Greeks told us stories about what we worship and to be very careful about what we worship. And so did the yogis. This is because oftentimes we are worshiping something that we become possessed by it. And again, this is no judgment on sports or Kobe Bryant or anything. But the dark side of Mars Neptune is also that that myth of Icarus. Icarus is the sky is the limits, and he flies high. And then his wings burn off because he gets too close to the sun. He has wax wings. So he burns them off and falls down into the ocean. And the truth is that when our conception of success, when our conception of what is worthy of our single-pointed devotion and focus is anything other than the divine and the products of divine love in our life, which include the way that we treat one another and so forth. But when we set our sights on personal achievement, personal greatness, accomplishment, etc., and behind it is this incredible will, this just relentless killer instinct. All of these channels were calling him an assassin. They were calling him, a killer, right? These kinds of words. That's Mars, right? Those are Mars words. When they say he would have sacrificed anything for this game, that's the martyr. Mars was the sign of the martyr, the person who would die for something, the soldier who will die in battle, right? But the Greeks and, our ancient ancestors in both the East and the West were very clear that riding that energy is very dangerous as well, because it's very hard to make sure that our will, our ego, our accomplishment, and victory drive is not in service of ourselves, but is in service of something bigger, someone bigger. Ultimately, the aim of real yoga is that our absorption is in God. And so the complicated part for me in listening to what everyone was saying on the news was in recognizing the degree to which the cult of athletics globally oftentimes takes on a kind of religious presence in our life. And even though it has that spark of total devotion and can do good things in people's life, help them build confidence, help them build courage, help them build work ethic, etc., that so much of the value of heroism in our world is about the personal ego. And the investment in that story, the irony of it is that everyone was saying the sky was the limit for him. And indeed, it was the limit. The sky actually was the limit. And I don't mean that at all as a judgment. I know it might sound like it, but I really don't, because I don't know him. I don't know his soul. I don't know his karma at all. I'm speaking now only to the appearance of images in like popular collective mythology, really, just speaking at that level. You hear people saying the sky was the limit for him. He could have done anything. So many people commenting on how he wasn't satisfied, even though he was worth 300 million, he wanted to be a billionaire. People were really, really praising this trajectory. And he was doing good things too, teaching kids basketball, promoting women's basketball. There were good things. But I couldn't help notice that everyone kept saying the sky was the limit. It had a deep personal impact on me. Um, for me, I can only again speak personally, and I mean this in all respect. I think it's interesting that when he was young, one of his friends, I think it was Tracy McGrady, said that he said, "I want to be the best basketball player of all time, and then I want to die young, so that I'll be forever immortalized." And Tracy McGrady said, he put that aside when he grew older and had a family and kids, but it's kind of ringing in my ears that he would say that. And that is so the warrior's, mythology. Strike hard, kill big victories, big trophies, immortalization in battle, die young. And it's, for me, again, one of the reasons that this was personal was that while that is a destiny, that is a sacred face of the divine playing out in creation. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "Go fight this battle. You're a warrior. Go fight it. And if you die, you'll have died gloriously for doing your natural inborn dharmic duty. And if you live, you'll have lived to be heroic, and you'll have been brave and done your role. You'll played out your destiny. So it's win-win." But the deeper message of the Bhagavad Gita was not just to go and perform your duty, but was to know how to see your duty and your destiny, even if it's being a warrior, in relation to the process of surrendering ourselves to God. And that's where the Bhagavad Gita culminates, where eventually Krishna says, "Just give up all forms of religion and surrender to me. I'm your friend, I'm your parent, I'm your lover, but surrender your heart." And so the culmination of religion, both in many ways for the Greeks and for Indian astrologers as well, was to recognize the different ways in which we go looking for that religious experience. And because we fail to relate any of the dharmic and karmic circumstances of life back to that ultimate divine personality, that ultimate beingness of the universe, that when it's not related back to love for that source, we may fall short of seeing the true glory, the true victories, and the true accomplishments of any season in our life, and miss out on the opportunity to develop deeper intimacy with the source of all karmic seasons. So that's what I've been reflecting on, because what it did for me was it was very personal. Let me tell you my story now. So some of you know that a little while ago I had the chance to go to the Oscars and do some readings at a backstage gifting suite. And I ended up turning it down because I realized I just needed to be here focusing on what's in front of me, my family. And it was a hard choice because I wanted to go, and I kind of shared that with everyone. And I also shared that I talked a little bit about struggling with wanting to let go on some level of the extent to which I give my mind and my attention to professional sports. And when I was born, I have Mars opposite Neptune in my chart. So this archetype that I speak of is very familiar to me. Mars is opposite Neptune in my natal chart. So I had a moment where, after my sports team, Minnesota Vikings, lost in the playoffs, that I felt a feeling of disappointment that was out of proportion. It was, for me, not healthy. It was something that if I'm going to, I knew afterward, if I'm going to have sports in my life, then it has to occupy a different role, because the degree to which this is affecting me is not healthy, right? And I've been reaching toward this realization for a long time. It's felt like there's a part of me that's ready to let go of something of like an unhealthy attachment to sports. And it's been the big thing in the closet for me, I guess you could say, as someone who's kind of a spiritual public person. I live sort of a monastic lifestyle. Most people know that about me. And I'd say my one sort of, a piece of me that's really not very consistent, where I feel like a bit of a hypocrite, has been sports. And that's, again, that's not to say, God bless you if you like sports. I can only speak for myself and what it does to my own heart, right? So I don't want to get into debates about the nature of sports or not, but that's what it does for me. So Saturn and Pluto are opposing the sun in my birth chart right now. And I've had to make a number of difficult choices about my responsibilities. And a lot of it is centered around wanting to be a good dad, which is very uh, sun-like. The sun is a symbol of father, and Saturn and Pluto have opposed the sun in my chart. And as they're doing so, I made this decision not to go to the Oscars, and I made this decision. I made a decision also not to go back to India this winter, and then most recently to cut back greatly on the amount of sports that I watch. Actually, put the TV in the basement. And those choices to me, I can't explain it, but they felt so deeply important. And I can tell you that 4 weeks ago, 4 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to make that choice. And I was reflecting on what changed. What changed? Well, one thing that changed was that it's been a while since my team was in the playoffs a couple of years ago, but I was in India, so I missed it. And so it's been the first time in a while since I've been much more committed to the path of bhakti yoga, um, that I've gotten to see my team in the playoff and then watch them lose and then have that kind of emotional response. And so, in other words, 4 years worth of daily meditation later, I was able to have that experience on a level that stood out. It was like hitting my toe against that busted up piece of concrete and going like, something has to change. I've been needing to do this for a while and now it's time. So it was just that, right? It was just that. But then I had a few other things happen that really confirmed that I had made the correct decision to heed that emotional warning that came up for me after the game and say, you know what, on Sundays, I'm not going to watch the games any longer. I'm just going to spend time with my kids. And I'm going to, just put this away. And if my team makes the Super Bowl, I'll watch. But that's one game a year then, and probably not have to invest so much of myself. And I know that's the next step for me in my path. So it felt really good. On the first Sunday that I would be experiencing this, the Pro Bowl was on. And usually I would sit down and watch the Pro Bowl. That would have been what I would have done. But after finishing teaching my astrology class, I realized that it was time to I had to go run some errands, and I thought I'd go out with my daughter. So I took my daughter out on some errands, and we had a lot of fun together. And I was sitting there the whole time thinking, I'm so glad I'm not watching the Pro Bowl. And I can't believe that 4 or 5 weeks ago, I wouldn't have been able to make this choice. 4 or 5 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to make this choice. And here I am, I've made it, and I'm with my daughter, and I'm so happy. And I can feel that this is better, and I'm actually becoming the person that I want to be, that I've said to myself that I am. Those pockets of hypocrisy that we know exist within us that are so hard to address, that we hide because they're hard to address. I just was like, wow, I'm actually doing it. I was filled with such joy. Obviously, it's a test over time. We got to keep doing it, but just an initial victory. So I go to Target with my daughter. We got to get her a new car seat, right? She's outgrown the other one. And, like I think parents do when you're looking at safety equipment for your kid, I'm like, oh my God, what if I ever lost my daughter, right? If I ever lost my daughter, how bad, that would just devastate me. And, then you try to pull it back, like, all right, stop thinking about death. And like, so it could get kind of out of hand like that. But I was thinking about it. And then, you know, we got into the car and I had such a nice time with my girl. And on the way home, um, I was driving slowly and there was someone who was right behind me, you know, just like really kind of crazy. And I just slowed down and let them go around. And I had this thought afterwards that I said, 4 months ago, if I had been out and was trying to rush back for the game, I could have gotten in a car accident, right? You know, I was just thinking about the practical differences that our choices can have. I get home into my driveway and my daughter's sleeping in the back seat by this point. And I just look at my notifications on my phone and I see at the top a notification that Kobe Bryant has died. And come to find out that he had died in a horrible crash on a daddy-daughter date, and his daughter's name is Gigi. Well, my daughter's name is Gigi. And Kobe Bryant had been trying to move into a second act in life where that achievement drive, that competitive drive, was shifting directions. In some ways, people were saying, you know, he was really settling down, trying to prioritize his family, trying to set behind the killer, trying to set behind the Black Mamba. And he was starting to advocate for women in basketball, for his daughter. And it just hit me really, really hard that the parallel between the choices I was making, the feeling that there could be a consequence if I don't make this choice, and then seeing this. And this happens to us all the time in the world. Collective events coincide with our own personal karma in synchronistic but acausal ways, meaning they're not causally connected at all. But karmically, sometimes the vision or version of what we could become or what could happen to us or some parallel to our own story will flash before our eyes. And sometimes it has a way of warning us, like the voice of prophecy. Sometimes it has a way of encouraging us, like that inner voice of conscience saying, you made a good choice. But that's also part of what Neptune does. Neptune has so much to do with the intersection between personal karma and collective karma. That's why Neptune is often made reference, we make reference to Neptune in relation to what we call the zeitgeist. Okay, so then I walked in and I just thought about what's behind the energy in my heart that's participating in sports all the time. It's the same part of me that has hired a personal assistant because I need help. It's the same part of me that, you know, made the decision with my wife last year that we weren't going to have any more children because it was a part of me started saying the acceleration, the speed, the accomplishment, the drive, the idea of just creating and making and doing and accomplishing and striving. I started recognizing it in terms of a word that's used in the Bhagavad Gita, part of the description of the three material modes of nature. One of them is rajas, which means passion. It's Mars-like. Now, passion put into the service of yoga, meaning union with God, in Bhakti Yoga is considered, you know, kind of part of the process. We get pretty passionate about our religious or spiritual life, and that can, in some ways, be helpful. But the thing we have to be so careful for is when our passion gets mistaken for yoga. And this is, to some extent, what I contend has happened in American culture and is very ancient. It's very old and is a perennial kind of experience that people have, which is that of the athlete or the warrior, the god of war, and so forth. And the way that when we think of trying to absorb ourselves fully into something that is transcendent, with Mars, sometimes we think I have to become transcendent. I have to transcend the game. I have to transcend my limits. I have to transcend what people say I am or can be. And so much of that keeps coming back to me. And that's so connected in mythology. Jung said this. So many others have said it. That's so connected in mythology to the eventual and inevitable death of the hero, because that the ego, everyone's ego dies someday. And in a weird way, the more that we throttle down on trying to transcend and press, and I'm going to be a billionaire, not a millionaire, and I'm going to be the best athlete, not what people say that I could be in the mid range. No, I'm going to be in the top. Like all of that, just the way that we're addicted to it. Just as addicted to it in some ways as we are Red Bull. You know what I mean? Every gas station you go into is like there's 300 Red Bulls sitting there. They can't have that many if they're not stocking them pretty regularly. But it's the same kind of like willful, et cetera, et cetera. If we don't have a way of becoming holy warriors, whatever that looks like, I think that we end up encountering the same thing over and over and over. We end up, worshiping at the altar of people who have accomplished a lot, that stand as some possibility of what we could accomplish in the karmic reality. But oftentimes the price that comes along with that accomplishment is a lot. It's a lot. And when we shift that same kind of martial energy into something spiritual, into something that is humanitarian, there were elements of Kobe Bryant's life that were very humanitarian. So again, this is no judgment about him. I'm just trying to speak to the collective mythology around an athlete, immortalizing an early death and so forth. If we're not careful, though, general message is that, think of 12 different announcers all saying the sky is the limit. The sky was the limit for him, and not recognizing the way in which the sky actually is the limit when it comes to trying to express our will in a way that we think will not eventually, fall down, because that's the nature of the will. We're mortal and we're frail. Mars also the quintessential planet of death and downfalls in ancient astrology. So it's a deep archetype. And when I got home and I realized that the young girl that was with him, his daughter, was named Gigi, it hit me really, really hard, because part of what I recognize in myself about achievement and drive and focus and da-da-da and da-da-da, it's as if the older I grow in my faith practice, the more that I realize that we so frequently mistake passion for devotion, and that passion in the yogic sense, passion burns, but it also burns us eventually. We have to be really careful. So, what I'm learning very slowly, very stubbornly, and, kind of ignorantly in my own way is that, I have to sort of pull back from that expression or use of Mars in my life. And a lot of this has come through a Saturn and Pluto are opposing my sun, making me think very deeply about the limits of my own ego, of my own body. I had a kidney stone last summer that was very eye-opening in terms of my own mortality and limitations. I've had to cut back my reading schedule. I've had to hire a personal assistant. I had to, I've turned down the Oscars. This way of realizing, like, yeah, this path is not, if it becomes about that, I'm going to lose something. And it's this sense that I had, and I can't explain it, is that if I didn't make this choice to say I need sports to step big time down in my life, that I was going to lose something important. And so it wasn't a fear-based decision. It felt, like when you're walking through the woods and you just get that feeling, don't step there, because you don't know why, and you just go, oh, you can't see anything. And then, maybe in the light you see that there was, a big hole or something. It just felt like that. Like it's just time to make this a wise choice, to set aside something of my own intense, passionate achievement drive, because there is some kind of inborn limit here, and I feel like I'm about to hit it. The kidney stone that I got with Saturn Pluto opposed my sun was one of the first realizations that I had of this. So at any rate, I couldn't stop crying the night after it happened for a while. Like, and I just kept thinking about my daughter, and just how devotion, quieter, humbler devotion to my craft, to my kids, um, that's the direction I want to go in. I don't want to be immortalized, you know. You know, recognizing that there's something in me that's worked and driven and stuff like that because that program was operating in me somehow, and just coming to realize the power that it's had, and that I want to change my life a little bit so that at least starting to not let it be so dominant. And for whatever reason, his passing, also because I had predicted the passing of someone like this the week before, it was one of the more specific predictions I've made recently. Um, it hit me really hard. It was really intense. So here's one more story that I wanted to share, and it's about karma again, and it's similar. I think that we all have the opportunity to take the cues and signs right now. Saturn and Pluto give us those cues. They can be sudden, they can be startling, they could be happening a million miles away from us and happening in the collective somewhere, but somehow they speak to us. They speak very personally to us. And then we have the ability to adjust. And then it's as though the letter of that karmic law will be required. Something is required of us, some form of sacrifice, some adjustment. The time is asking for something. There is a dharma and a karma, a sense of essential duty and a sense of something we've inherited, specific circumstance that we've walked into, and we have to handle it. And we know that there's some pressure around it. Some of it we know may be out of our hands, but some of it is up to me. And if we can tune in and listen and make that about a personal connection with God or personal connection with the universe, that's how we start developing more absorption in love, in our actual source, in our actual soul. And if we make that adjustment, then there's a way in which the requirements of the karma will be met, but we have a feeling as though we've skated just past something. And sometimes you end up just seeing that reflected back to you around you. For example, when I was driving and that car swerved around me, you know, and went nuts, like just crazy like that. And I thought, okay, maybe 4 weeks ago, I would have been more aggressive to get home and contend with this guy and get into an accident. Have you ever had the kind of experience where something like that happens and then you see them a mile down the road pulled over by a police officer in a fender bender, something like that, and you get that feeling? That could have been me, or something bad was about to happen, but I made an important choice and I shifted something. That's also a part of what's happening right now with Saturn, Pluto, and these big aspects with Neptune. So the other story is this. This is a simple one, but I think it goes right to the point. With Pluto and Saturn opposing my sun, and with Mars, you know, in a fire sign at the Anticia with Jupiter, Jupiter on my moon, which is the ruler of property. I started having this irrational fear that maybe my house would burn down. You understand where it's coming from. Jupiter's on my moon in Capricorn. There's an Anticia with Mars in a fire sign. And I was talking about the downfall of something, and I was like, in my own house, wouldn't it be awful if my own house burned down or something? So I had this fantasy over and over again. And I felt really, really frustrated by feeling like I did after my sports team lost. And simultaneously seeing that Anticia on the horizon, weeks in advance, I was like looking at it though and being like, into the moon and da-da-da. And in that space of extreme frustration about my sports team, where the passionate fire is burning within me, I started fantasizing about my house burning down as a potential prediction. As an astrologer, we have to be so careful of those kinds of things because the karma is better talked about generally, specifically so that people will take more seriously the importance of their free will within the coming configuration. So we might say, for example, there could be some difficulties with home or property. There could be some da-da-da. You kind of list a range of possibilities, and then you give some advice for how to handle the energy at the same time. Well, here's what I've found sometimes is important. It's important to do this when you get those feelings like something is coming, or you see something in the astrology. So I said, you know what? This image of this was in prayer and meditation. I realized this image of the fire and the house and the worst case scenario. This is being generated out of a space where I'm burning with frustration for days about my team losing in the playoffs. So there is something disproportionate about my response to this event. And therefore, what I'm imagining about the astrology is disproportionate to what is. At the same time, I suddenly got this idea. I said, what if instead of burning with, the fire inside of this frustration, what if I spent more time with my family? And this is around the time that I made this decision to step back and tone everything down. And it's, wow, I did it, Mars, Jupiter, I suddenly got the image of a bonfire. So what if we had a bonfire out, out in the yard? And part of me was like, well, that would feed right into it, because then it'll be the bonfire that melts the house down. Then I was like, no. Like, I'm disproportionate response that came from the fire of a frustrated space in my life. But I want to honor the psychic image of conflagration, right? This conflagration image came up in my mind and in my heart and became a source of fear for a few days. So how can we interact with that creatively? Bringing that in, interacting with the karmic season, with the karmic moment, but doing it with a little bit more intelligence, listening to that inner prompting. So I said, let's have a bonfire. And so we had a bonfire, and then we had a couple more. And it's been a nice thing to do. And I noticed as soon as I was out, my kids went to bed and I stayed up for a while with the bonfire, did a little chanting out by the bonfire. And immediately I was like, there's a good kind of heat and there's a not so good kind of heat. You know what I mean? The word tapasya in yoga basically means austerity. We grow when there's a little bit of friction, right? When there's friction around us and we make the choice we make a sacrifice of ourselves. We make a difficult choice, but we try to do it gladly. The friction of the moment, whenever there's a feeling like, I better do something, I've stubbed my toe, now it feels like the stakes are higher, like maybe that's a sign, like maybe I should get the driveway fixed. And we actually listen and we actually do it. The sacrifice that we make in that moment, that is satisfying the karmic law of the time. And so sometimes it'll require more of us than we know how to give. But a lot of the time, there's just this way where every karmic season just says, give something, sacrifice something, put something of yourself, put some skin in the game. You know what I mean? Put something of yourself into this, of your heart and soul, into this moment. Recognize the pressures around you, not just in terms of what can I get or what's standing in the way of what I'm trying to do, but thinking also, what is being asked of me to give? And in what way is this situation like a cosmic sensitivity training? That's my guru would say, that is essentially teaching me to take the next step in my spiritual life. If we look at things that way, then it's as though suddenly we'll have a bonfire out back. It'll require, it will satisfy some element of the karmic requirement of the moment. And then it feels as though we're passing through something that could have turned out differently. And you know how you'll know that it could have turned out differently? Because there's a weird way in which the universe will give you the exact image of the thing that you were afraid of happening just around the corner, on the news, somewhere else. It's not to say that there's any causal, literal connection between the two things, but it's as though God just wants to show us, good. Not that I would have done that to you, but good that you're seeing that the consequences matter. Good that the fears you have are becoming the friction of tapasya, of austerity, of giving from the heart, something to take that next step. And then we grow. So, get this, a few days after our first bonfire, I was preparing another bonfire, going outside and thinking, I'm so glad, like I'd really turned a corner, and I was feeling so good about this. and feeling like I can't. 4 months ago, for the whole of my life, I would have never been able to step away from football. And for whatever reason, now I just feel like there's something consequential here, and I have to got to put some skin in the game. So I go inside. I'm getting ready to get this bonfire going, and uh, I see the news says that there's been, not far from where I live, there's been an awful house fire, and everyone, not everyone, but several of the people in the house died. And it's not far from where I live. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And I did not sit there and go, well, because I had a bonfire, like the fire hopped over to their house and wasted them, good on me. Like that's not at all what I was thinking, and not what I'm encouraging us to think. I'm just saying that if you want to know if you're making the right sacrifices and choices in your spiritual life, when you feel the pressure, you think your choices matter, so you make a tough choice. There's a funny way in which the collective will bounce something back to you to confirm, yes, that guiding instinct was correct. This is what Saturn-Pluto does right now by offering us that sense that there needs to be deep foundational level change. And it happens because of things coming up in the collective, coming up like a volcano, bursting open, and something stands forth and you go like, oh my God. Well, for me, it wasn't a huge, it was just the bursting forth of a really toxic set of feelings around a team losing. But it was not just a team, it was connected to my history, to my past, to the hometown I grew up in, to regional, cultural, all sorts of things. There was so much, it was so deep and so personal for me to make that decision. And somehow it just was able to happen at last. And then somehow you see the feedback around you saying, good job. So that's the story that I wanted to share with all of you today. And I hope that what you're able to do right now is feel the shape of the moment and ask what it's requiring of you to take the next step in your spiritual life. If we can gladly give something, make a sacrifice, take that next mature step forward, I think right now you will see that your dreams, things happening around you with so much Neptune in play, with Venus and Mars at play, in your relationships, the people in the world around you, the interconnectedness of people and things happening, will have a way of feeding back and giving you that nudge you need, that prophetic gesture, go that way, don't do this, do more of that, do less of this. And then the feedback saying, good job, right? Or that feedback around you saying, warning, warning. So watch for that kind of stuff right now. And we can watch for that in the collective as well, knowing that maybe the positive impact of Saturn-Pluto is that there is an opportunity to take our finger off the trigger and step back before becoming very self-destructive. So I wish you all the best. I hope that you are having a nice week. There is coming up soon, I will be having my overview for the month of February, and personal horoscopes, sun, rising sign horoscopes for all 12 signs. Leave your comments in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I want to qualify one more thing and say that, in some ways it's unfair to pull on the very personal, very specific life and karma of someone in the news and, dissect it as a part of a spiritual lesson and all of this stuff. And I think that, in doing this today, my main intention was to try to illustrate something of the mythology and the archetypes that are at play in such a story as we experience it on the collective stage. But I know very well that the karma of each individual is nothing that any of us can possibly fathom, and it is infinitely personal between each soul and God. So much respect to Kobe Bryant and to the life he lived, and for the ability that we have to reflect on one another. And, it's my hope that, my kids will be able to talk about my life in such a way and learn from it and grow from it as well someday. So, that was something that came to my mind as well. So at any rate, like I said, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.